Hi, I'm John Baguley, and I'm the chair of the International Fundraising Consultancy. So this is IFC Horizons, and this is our first move from physically meeting at some place in Europe for our international directors to meet completely online and avoid the costs of travel, etc. Okay, so we have a packed agenda today. And the first person out will be Helen Maynard Hill, who's going to talk to us today about fundraising on the internet, online fundraising, and as part of that, she will touch on Google Grants, which I think is a fascinating subject. So
how do I do this?
Yes, what we'll do is we'll talk for a time and then invite questions. We're going to have some gaps in the day at 1:45 so people can wander off to have a break and have tea or coffee, and again at 3 o'clock. And people that I no doubt will join us from different parts of the world at different times. Hello, Jim. I just noticed Jim from India is there. Good to see you, Jim. Okay. The camera on my screen is firmly on Helen Eves Rose. Hi, Helen. Rather than being on me, so I'm not sure what is being recorded. I also note, looking up there, that Bill's is muted.
Yes, that was done on purpose. The recording should go to the person who's talking. So I thought, if the people who aren't talking, mute it and make sure that accidental noise doesn't take it over.
Right. That's a good idea. Okay, so far we've got 7 participants, which I think is quite good. Our international meetings rarely had more than that. So I think that's a very positive sign. Okay, Helen, would you like to kick off and do the first talk for us? And then we'll have a question and answer session.
So I need to share my screen, I think, don't I? Hang on.
You do need to share your screen somewhere. If you put your cursor onto the picture, you'll see mine is at the bottom and it's a little green sign with an arrow saying share.
Hang on.
It disappears until you move your cursor again.
Where is it, sorry?
Bottom of the screen, just below the picture in your screen. It's a green box with an arrow coming up.
No.
It's at the bottom of the, it's a green one.
Yeah, you'll need your cursor on the screen to get the little box to come up.
Oh. Is it my microphone? Is it better?
That's a little bit better, yes.
Okay.
Ah, here we are. It's on my screen now. Online fundraising. Brilliant.
Hey, there we go.
We have go. Excellent.
Okay, from the beginning. So I turn my fan off because that probably doesn't help. Is that better? There's not less background noise then. Yeah?
That's better.
Okay. Brilliant. Okay. So I want to talk about online fundraising because I think it's really interesting. I'm a bit of a geek about it, and I think that it's quite an interesting way that fundraising is moving. So I want to talk about Web 1.0. So I want to go back to the beginning. We're going to go in a bit of a time machine this afternoon and go back to the beginning about where it all started, the current situation, beginnings of social media, well, I've repeated that, mobile tech at a glance, mobile donations, online social media, fintech, and then maybe discuss about what's next and some ideas that are coming up and what's happening. So here's our time machine. We're going back to the beginning. So NGOs began their transition from traditional print to online in about the 1990s. For those of us, I think most of us would remember that. I gave this presentation to some students at Delft University a few months ago now. And I said, yeah, back in the 90s. And they all looked super blankly at me. So, okay. But people like Amnesty International and WWF, the World Wildlife Fund, they launched their first websites in 1992 and began experimenting with online. At the time, they were using HTML, good old days of that. And then it developed into using other website instruments, I guess, like Constant Contact, WordPress, which a lot of us use, MailChimp, which I know that a lot of us use as well. And what we did with that is we started to do email communications and BCCing people. And it was very rudimentary and very at the very beginnings. And the assumptions made at the time were about how donors are perceived. So world healers, like it's their duty to do more. Mostly women, age 65, or 65% were women, age 55 plus, and mostly well-educated with spare money. And there's also some tests to donate going on and regular giving, and the golden goose, if you like, was regular giving. So they wanted to attract 46% of database was inactive, and they wanted to use online at this moment to kind of cultivate those people that were inactive. So this was the beginnings of social media, and it started with blogging, and a lot of charities began sort of around 2003 using Blogger, and at the time it was a radical shift because they wanted to have a content-driven strategy. So they were writing content and being open to the public about themselves. The irony being that 15 years later or now, NGOs crave for that interactivity, and they want it. But at the time when they started, they were worried about about the public being interactive and making comments that they couldn't control. So it was a big shift at the time for doing that. At that time, they also launched, there was the rise of things like MySpace, Friends United was there as well. Facebook was launched in 2004, YouTube 2005, and Twitter in 2006. It all happened really, really quickly. And then early adopters such as the Humane Society and Greenpeace created pages on MySpace. So they were the super early adopters, and they wanted to kind of take the initiative with this new introduction. We think that NGOs, well, I think that NGOs don't really get the credit for really propelling social networking into the kind of popular space, if you like, because they really did use it, or they tried to play with it, and they tried to make use of it for their own needs way back when. And I think it kind of gets a bit forgotten that actually NGOs were really trying to use this means for their organisations at the time. So this was taken from the latest Black Belt report, which I found quite interesting. And I think it's not really a surprise, but it's still interesting that in 2008, I can't see the result because I'm in the way, but 2008 obviously gives the highest level of fundraising online. So this is in the Black Belt charitable giving report, which everybody can download if you go onto their website. And it is quite an interesting read to see where online giving is going. But it's just interesting to see in 2012, it was fairly high given the kind of the beginnings of such the media, and then it dropped and then increased again. So I don't really know the reason behind that, but I just thought it was quite an interesting statistic. Online giving has been growing with the introduction of the iPhone in 2007. And it was a new era for everybody of communication, not just for NGOs, but for lots of different reasons. And the iPhone, as we know, continues to be one of the best sellers to this day, even though others like, Samsung and all the others try to compete. iPhone still is kind of one of the best. At the time, they were lacking in creativity for online giving and apps. So there wasn't a big take-up. It wasn't a big take-up, but people did experiment with SMS giving in 2010. And again, it wasn't a massive take-up because just because it was kind of clunky and it wasn't so interactive and intuitive as people are at the moment trying to expect. But what happened then in 2010 with the Haiti disaster, there was a big call to action via SMS, and that increased the technology and increased the kind of awareness of it hugely. So that was quite interesting. And then 2004, there was new technology with the apps being created and developed new technology, so SMS was losing interest. And now 2008, only 15% of NGOs still send regular payments. It just doesn't be as interactive or successful as other means. So it'd be interesting to see in the future if SMS comes to revival, because things like the QR codes, which I haven't actually mentioned, but QR codes was amazingly popular for quite a while, then took a dip, and now it seems to have a revival. So it's interesting to see if that happens again with SMS as well. And then Facebook. Traditionally, Facebook relied on the donor knowing donors, as we know. It relies on relationship building, but through Facebook, it was difficult to do that at the time. But what they're trying to do is get to know your donor better, and things like the birthday fundraiser, which is becoming more and more popular on Facebook. I don't have the stats for it. I know that it's raised 300 million last year through the birthday fundraisers, shows that it is increasing. And also now they're removing charitable fundraising fees, which means 100% of the money will now go to the charity. So that kind of disrupts people like GoFundMe and Global Giving, because their business model is charging charities to use them. So if Facebook continues to do this, a massive disruptor, and could actually move the marketplace quite substantially. They could also set up donor advised funds to rival organisations like Volunteer Match. So Facebook is kind of an interesting platform for many reasons for the fundraiser. I think it could be used very usefully, but again, we need to kind of stay on the right side of it so that it doesn't overtake what we're trying to do. Okay. Yeah, when it began, like I say, there's lots of dollars, but there's very little data. And also, traditionally, we find that people can, like a Facebook page from an organisation, but it doesn't necessarily turn them into donors. So there's a long road to go from a Facebook like into actually making the donation. I've got a whole nother presentation about that one. Okay, so the current situation, this was taken from the 2008 Global NGO Technology Report, which again, fascinating read, geeks like me. And what it demonstrates is about web communication. And what I found in that report was countries that you wouldn't think, countries like developing countries such as countries in Africa and India and Asia, all of them have huge website presence, in that they have a website. Whether they use it or how they use it is debatable and depends on NGO, like anywhere else in the world. But most charities in the world, like as a general statement, do have a website, as we see, and 92% of NGOs have a website. How they use it, again, is kind of debatable. 63% regularly send email updates to their donors. PayPal and credit cards are the most accepted forms of payment, but this is changing. There seems to be lots more businesses that are popping up that help charities with their payment systems. And I've come across lots of different organisations that are exploring this field. And here in the Netherlands, I know that there's lots of different banks, like fintech banks, that are starting to do lots of different payment systems. So this could be quite interesting for charities as well to get involved with. Donors increasingly prefer to give online campaigns created by friends and family. It's becoming easier and easier with stuff like Facebook, and also with banks and new fintech banks getting involved. Yeah, what's that? Okay. According again to this report, social networking is an integral part for NGOs and fundraising. 93% of the NGOs they interviewed had a Facebook page, 77% Twitter profile, 56% LinkedIn, 50% Instagram, and 71% agree social media is effective for fundraising. And 25% social media comms inspires people to give, apparently. Again, this is all, I think this is interesting, but it'd be more interesting, I guess, to delve into the facts. I mean, it's very well lots of people having a Facebook page, but how they utilize it and how kind of the return on investment is quite an interesting thing that needs maybe a deeper report. The same with Twitter. You can put tweets on there, but actually how it converts, I think, is a whole different scenario. Oh, and another interesting thing that the report brings up is about the increase in mental health, especially for people like millennials who are on Facebook quite a lot or on the social media quite a lot, and how the integration actually isn't. They kind of talk to people through Facebook or through Twitter or Snapchat or whatever their means are. They don't actually interact with each other. So whether this is kind of now detrimental to young people's health is quite interesting. And I know actually personally quite a lot of people take breaks quite regularly from social media just to kind of get a fix of normality. I actually had a meeting at the hub, and it was with one of the young people there, and she said, yeah, we call it, what is it, in real life, in real life, as opposed to not on real life. So she said, yeah, we could meet in real life, do an event in real life. And I was like, as opposed to what? And she was like, well, as opposed to online. It's like, gosh, that's a natural thing. So it was quite interesting that that's an actual saying now. But anyway, maybe I'm just showing my age. Okay, so the world's top apps, this is no surprise, I guess, to anybody, is Messenger, WhatsApp, Facebook, and Instagram. But there's more and more coming through. Snapchat really popular in North America, and also in Europe, and Viber as well, and Line in Asia as well. So 18%, only 18% make use of messaging apps. But I think it's interesting to keep an eye on this because it's the way that the millennials, so the new generation coming through, they interact. I've got my 16-year-old niece staying with me at the moment, and her friend. They're constantly on their phones, Snapchatting away with their mates in the UK constantly, and they're the next generation of givers. So I think it's interesting to keep an eye on what's going on and what the next generation are using. So maybe we'll take at a glance. Like we just said, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger are the main players, and the others are quite far behind. The average use of WhatsApp followers is interesting. Again, it doesn't really translate into what actually the usage is or how that is efficient for charity. So I think it's a top line thing. And I don't know whether there's a report out there that goes into a bit more depth about, all right, well, we've got X number of WhatsApp followers, but how does that actually translate into volunteering and to fundraising? That might be quite an interesting thing to look into. Facebook, I took this sample because obviously Facebook and how charities are starting to use it. So like we say, 93% of NGOs have a Facebook page and 30% have a Facebook group, but how they only post like 25% only post once a day. That's not a lot out of all those people that have Facebook groups. Again, this is quite interesting usage of what they do, because years ago we used to say, well, if you've got a if you're an NGO, you have to have a website, you have to have a Facebook group, you have to have Instagram, you have to be on top of it. But there's no point in having all these things if they lay dormant. You have to be able to have the resources to not only maintain it, but also to have good content, keep up your SEO. It's become a massive science, and I don't think a lot of charities have the resources to kind of keep up with what's necessary to have a social media strategy. So email fundraising it's making a comeback. So it started in 2010 with email donations, and there's people like oh gosh, I can't remember the names now, but there's a massive organization in the States where they do online petitioning and then they turn them into email donations, and they're very, very good at that and very efficient. They're called, I'll think of it. I didn't put them into the presentation, but anyway. 2006, email donation was up by 28%, so it increased, and I think it's increasing even more. And people still like giving by email. So there's a lot of social media interaction, but I think it needs to be tied in with email, good old emails as well, and that newsletter giving and that newsletter content. because again, it's about relationship building. If you receive a personalized email in your inbox, again, it's building that relationship. Okay, the Funding Lab is a product started here in the Netherlands, and what we're planning to do is make use of Google grants, because Google gives away $10,000 worth of online advertising to charities per month, and a lot of organizations don't make use of it, or they apply for it, they get it, but because they don't maintain it, or they don't have the resources to maintain it, they lose it. Therefore, we're starting to say to them, look, we can apply for you, we can maintain your grant, and we can keep it ongoing. So I've got a team, although one's just got a job, but anyway, so I've got a team who are doing the Google grants for the charities, who also are placing the ads. We're monitoring, we do monthly reports on what's happened, and then feedback in fundraising translation about what that means. Because you can say to a fundraiser, look, here's the data, but they don't necessarily understand how that relates to what they're trying to do. So we're translating it and saying, look, you need to do X, Y, Z on your website, you need to do whatever on online or on email to make sure that these interactions convert. So we've got these reports. We're doing a presentation in September to 3 charities that we are doing pro bono. And what we're hoping at that moment is they convert for us, they become clients, and we keep them as an ongoing thing month by month to maintain their online strategy. That's what we're hoping with the Funding Lab. The Internet of Things I find fascinating as well. It means where everything's connected. So on my mobile phone, for example, I can control the lighting in my house, I control the heating, I can control the TV. It's the way kind of forwards where things are being built to do. It's kind of, I think it's quite gimmicky now, but I think give 5 years or so, it's just going to be the norm where you can control the lighting just, sitting by your phone. So I find that quite interesting. I don't know if it's fundraising related, maybe it could be, but just to kind of keep aware of what makes donors tick, how that could, I don't know, it's just my brain in overload, I think, thinking, well, how can we connect stuff to how we use stuff to fundraising? I don't know. It's just, I just wanted to, So mobile donations, online revenue made up 7.2% of all donations received in 2006. And more and more people are using these sort of things to donate to charities, just because everybody's used to, or a lot of people are used to online banking, and online banking a lot of the time is on mobile phones, especially here in Europe, I guess the UK as well, that you can just do online banking, and so they're used to doing this and making donations with it as well. So I think that more and more charities are going to just a push on your telephone just to make that donation, make it quick and simple. Okay. So online fundraising at a glance, NGOs accept online donations most of them do through credit cards, PayPal, direct debit. Bitcoin is kind of coming through, but people are still a bit confused about it because it's not an actual tangible thing. I think people don't really understand it. But whether that's going to increase in the future, who knows, we can wait and see. Still, most people like peer-to-peer fundraising. So if your friend is asking you to do something rather than the organisation, then you're more likely to do it. Giving Tuesday, I don't know, it's good, it's big in the States, I guess, Brian, right? Yeah, I don't know how big it is in the UK now, John and Bill, is it big? Giving Tuesday or not?
Sorry, forgot I'd muted myself. Not huge, I would say. I mean, it's big in certain sectors, but I think there's room for growth.
Yeah, and here in the Netherlands too. But this is the report's obviously taken from the US, but NGOs participating, worldwide participation, I would be quite dubious. I think it's a big states thing. I don't think it's a big, I don't know, Italy, Francesca, is it big with you or not? No.
Yeah, the donor day, let's say, in October, but it's not so.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, maybe it's a bit biased.
Unfortunately, because it's a very good idea.
Yeah, but it's not a very big uptake here either. Yeah, it's good to see that donors agree that NGOs effectively express their gratitude 91%. That's what we've been telling them for years, so that's really good. Yeah, and donors are, interestingly, donors are more likely to trust websites that use .org, which I found quite interesting. So, yeah. Social media at a glance. Again, no surprises. Facebook pages, social media used by NGOs, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. YouTube is interesting, John, since we've started the IFC YouTube channel.
Yes.
And 95% agree that social media is effective for online brand awareness if they use it correctly. Again, coming down to the usage. So, and recruiting volunteers as well. It's a great use to recruit volunteers, again, if the messaging is right. So I mentioned a bit previously, Generation Z, or the I generation. I mean, John, you've written about this in your books as well. And it's people that are born kind of in the year 2000 or so. And they're used to the internet. They get mobile. It's like they've never not known it. And they're really comfortable with technology. So we need to kind of be aware of this generation if we're going to keep doing what we do or keep funding coming in. Because the US population by 2020, this generation will account for 40% of all consumers, which is kind of really quite scary. So understanding them is really super critical. And also it's good to understand that they like to give different causes, whereas the older generation, so the baby boomers, etc., they if they had a cause, then they would stick to it. Whether these they're quite the nature of who they are, they're quite easy to be ethical in their choices, and they are quite keen to volunteer as well, apparently, and they like to give back. So they kind of see through any unauthentic organisations, and you find that more Generation Zers or iGen want to work for organisations that have sustainability in their core, or want to work for organisations that actually have some ethics rather than just work for the big bucks like they did in the 80s, for example. So, now this I find quite interesting, fintech donation innovation. I think that's quite interesting. So 4% of charities are using contactless, which is tiny, really. And most charities believe the introduction of contactless will be helpful because obviously it make it easier. And apparently 54% of the public agree. So I think we need to be interested in talking to technology companies and joining forces and saying, well, you know, the public want this, the charities need this. Let's get together and try and create some innovation, some technical donation innovation to make life easier, make donations easier. So I've got a small video, I hope this works, of cancer research a few years ago. I don't know if anybody's seen this before, but cancer research created these really cool things, and I'll play the video because it explains it quite nicely. Their small donations back that they can keep research going. Actually, what highlight? So I thought that was, can you hear me again? Is that okay?
Yeah, can hear you, thanks.
I thought it was quite a nice explanation and quite an interesting story as well.
Could you just run through what it was? Because
Kensington, Guildford and Marylebone, which are obviously wealthy, well, not obviously, but they're wealthy parts of England. So obviously I tried them there. It was done between January the 30th and the 13th of February in 2015. Yeah, 2015, which is quite a short amount of time. And also it was done, 4 years ago now, and I still can't find any results. So I don't know whether it was a success or not, but I wanted to show it because I quite like the idea. And I thought it was quite interesting. I don't know if anything else has been done since. I think so yeah, I just thought that was quite interesting. Right.
Helen, could you quickly run through what happened in the video, because it wasn't clear to me what was going on.
I'm sorry.
It looked like the social swipe, which I'm familiar with, where you put a credit card through something and it collects money from it as a donation.
Yeah, so in the charity shop window, they had, did you see that? They had the lady in the screen, and the lady interacted with the person going by and saying, can you donate? And it was just a tap. So you just, with your card, you just tap on the screen where it says, and it takes a £2 donation.
Right, so it's contactless giving.
Contactless giving with a bit of interaction with the video.
Excellent. I'm sure that'll be huge, because we pay for everything in the UK through contactless giving.
Yeah.
Everything under £30.
Yeah, same here as well. But this was 4 years ago. So I think maybe, I don't know if it was beyond its time, or I don't know, maybe it just cost too much, because I mean, they had obviously that they had, ad agencies. But I can't find any results anywhere about how beneficial it was. And I think if it had been a massive success, then I think we would have known about it more, right?
We tried to do something similar with a client here in the UK, the National Army Museum, a year or so ago, a couple of years ago now, and it didn't work. But it didn't work because they put the thing in the wrong place, and the video they chose was horrible. They ignored our advice about what it should be and went with what a focus group of their staff decided should be instead.
Right.
And so they just decided that the costs weren't worth it. But I think it was a real missed opportunity, because I think it can be really successful if done right.
Yeah, totally. I mean, like I say, I don't know if this was a success or not, because I can't find any results. And I think if it had been a massive success, then it would be all over the charity press. And it was a while ago, but it's the sort of thing that you would remember. So I'm not sure, but I thought it was a great idea. Yeah, I think it could work, given, like Bill says, given the right implementation, then it could really, really work nicely. So I've got another quick video to show about virtual reality, because again, I think it's something that charities could quite simply adopt. So I'll play you another video.
Helen, we're not getting the sound again. Maybe if you unplug your headphones, it might make a difference. That's nearly working. I can hear, but it's not continuous flow of picture, unfortunately.
I can share the link. The link will be there anyway.
Yeah, that would be really good.
I know that.
Okay. So I'll stop this if it's not really working properly. Hang on.
So what they were, can you hear me again?
Yes.
What they're basically saying is they've got these virtual reality headsets and they put them on people in cities like London.
You're quite quiet for me. I don't know if it's the same for everybody else.
There we go. How's that?
Yeah, that's better. Shout at me.
And then I shout myself. So they have these virtual reality headsets of pictures of Aleppo, the bomb sites of Aleppo, and they go to places like London and Manchester and city centres, so people actually see it kind of in real life, if you like. It's not just on the news or on the TV. They actually kind of get to virtually experience it. And I thought this was a really interesting idea, using technology, again, virtual reality, to bring home something that's quite removed if you're a busy business person in the centre of London. And they say it's been really quite successful. Again, I haven't seen any results of it, but I think more and more charities are looking at virtual reality, either be it, I don't know, in museums, for example, or be it wherever. But I don't think virtual reality is that expensive, to create. And I think it's an interesting way to actually bring home the message that you're trying to do. Somebody can actually see it in place, with, especially with something like, war-torn areas where it's so far removed and so removed from your own livelihood, your own, lifestyle. So I thought it was quite an interesting video. The link is on my presentation, which I guess you're going to share, so you can just look it up on YouTube and watch it. So the last thing I want to talk about is gaming. So I don't know if anybody's had experience of gaming, but I think it's something that's growing. My nephew is a gamer. He's studying gaming at university. Who knew there was such a degree? But anyway, so he's doing that. And last year he did a 24-hour gaming session to raise money for, I can't remember, cancer, I think it was. So I looked into this because I thought this was fascinating. How do they do this? And basically, it's a big thing. What they do is they broadcast themselves live, so they stream it, playing games whilst urging others to view it. And there's like massive conferences where people can actually go to, and they sit and watch people playing games. And apparently it's so that they can learn how to do it or how to get better at it, which kind of actually makes sense. It's like, why do we go to conferences? To learn how to get better at it. So it's the same for gamers, but in this scenario they go, or they stream it online, and they do these 24-hour marathons, and it's like a telethon but gaming. So every so now and often they say donate blah 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 for whichever charity they're raising money for, and it's very successful. It has been so far. For example, here Game Blast 17 in February raised £102,000. So it's developing. Gift Aid, also, Just Giving, have actually got a Gaming for Good hub on their website, because it's increasing so much that they thought it was worth dedicating a massive part of their resources to. So and I thought it was just young teenagers in a dark room somewhere doing this, but apparently families are into gaming. So on average 67% of parents play video games with their children at least once a week, and apparently 45% say it helps spend time together, okay, according to the stats. I don't know, anyway. But Gaming for Good, apparently it's a new innovation, is exciting, it's really low cost because the gamers do it themselves, they stream it. So it means that charities don't have to spend any money actually doing it or putting something together, it's all online. They do it themselves. And Just Giving have got a whole resource dedicated to it, and I think it's the new kind of way forward. So I just wanted to bring that to people's attention to see if anybody else had kind of experienced it. I'm still a bit confused about it, but you know, if it's a new thing, then you know, we could investigate it and see what happened. So yeah. So what's next? We don't know. So there's a few ideas there. Like I say, the technology is there. Technology moves so quickly. Fundraisers need the funding all the time, and donors are willing to take advantage of new technologies. I think us as fundraisers need to connect with the innovators and the technology innovators and say, look, we need a bit of help here. You're the clever creators. We're the clever fundraisers. Let's get together and make some technology to make donating as easy as possible. So where that goes, I don't know yet, but I think it's quite an exciting time. And that's me. Any questions?
Great. Thank you very much, Helen. That was really interesting. You covered a very wide area there, and some very useful developments are obviously coming up in future. When I've talked to clients, it's been fascinating because it seems self-evident to me that one should be building up a social media presence. This is going to take a long time, but you build and develop the presence, giving them information, having them come on board and being interested in what you're doing, and then you begin to use the various ways of fundraising, whether it's using contactless or anything else, VR, or crowdfunding, which is another subject. And in the times I've spoken to clients about that they've been very fitful about what they've done with the social media. They haven't really built a presence. And then when they come to do something like crowdfunding or to make an appeal, they haven't had the volume of people there that would actually make the thing work. And it's only been occasionally where you've seen something happen which has taken off and happened on a great scale. That they then become interested because there's a lot of money there. But my feeling is that it's a slow build, and I wondered how you felt about that.
I think that a lot of people, just generally speaking, just do it badly or don't know what they're doing because it is a science. You know, we found with our own, you know, the IFC website, my own Netherlands website, it's getting the SEO right, having the good content, having it constantly updated, having relevance. It's an ongoing thing. It's a whole nother department, and traditionally it's been just part of a fundraiser's job. It's just been like, oh yeah, do some stuff with Facebook. It's not, but actually have to have dedicated resources to make it work. So I think they've probably been a bit disappointed in the past because it just hasn't been done right, because they don't really understand it, because they're not digital marketeers. So yeah, that's where hopefully Funding Lab comes in, because we can help them. We understand fundraising. We understand. I've got a digital marketer chap helping me with that side of things, bringing it together and saying, let's do this well, because the people want to give and they're used to interacting on Twitter and Facebook, but it just hasn't been done very well in the past. So yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah. And I think when you combine several technologies together, when you use street fundraising, and as Amnesty did, use the virtual headsets, you're really bringing people much, much closer to the people they're donating to, essentially, which is a very good thing. And if you then put that together with contactless giving, so it's so easy for them to give, it's got to be a winner.
I think it's all part of the whole strategy. So I don't think you should just concentrate on social media or crowdfunding, whatever. It's part of a whole bigger thing. But I think previously, like I say, you know, social media's just been sort of dismissed. So you get a newsletter, a traditional newsletter sent out, a paper one, but that doesn't really mention the Facebook page, or it doesn't mention whatever. Or there's street fundraising, face-to-face fundraising, but they don't actually mention about collecting things for, I don't know, the Facebook group or Twitter group, or it's not really been connected previously, or it has, but it hasn't really been done very smartly. So I think there's a lot of work still to do. I mean, social media isn't new anymore, but I think it's still not taken very seriously just because it hasn't really been utilised.
I think there's some really good examples out there of how people are using technology. I did a presentation beginning of the year to the Director of Social Change on Oh, sorry, there's a delivery come to my door. I'm going to have to pause for a second. Hang on one second.
It's Amazon.
All right.
Yeah, by drone.
Yeah. Just one thing on looking into the future. We're moving into an era towards facial recognition, and facial recognition has got some real serious problems with it, the way it's used by, say, the Chinese government. But as facial recognition begins to be something that actually works in everyday life, then there is the possibilities with something like a museum of having facial recognition, so that as people come through their doors for the second or third time, people can, the machine can say, welcome back. Yeah. You can have an avatar or something at the beginning of the museum or as you walk around, talking to you and recognizing you. And I'm sure that there will be future ways of turning that into a very effective fundraising tool. But that is
sounds like a nightmare, John. It's like the film Minority Report. Have you ever seen that?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're close to that. Oh.
I think that's very, very frightening.
But before I got interrupted by the postman, I'm sorry about that. I did a presentation to the Rectory of Social Change on exciting things happening in the world of fundraising or great campaigns. And there was a couple of things. There was one in Hong Kong about using contactless. And they've got this system where they call it flag days. They do these regularly. Every charity has a flag day. And they give people stickers to say they've donated. It means they're not bothered again. But what UNICEF did was make the stickers themselves contactless payment acceptors. So people got their phones, they pressed it to the flag, and their phone immediately went through to the website to say, make a donation. And so it's just a great way of using technology in order to take things further. So everybody who donated then became an ambassador themselves and said to their friends, hey, put your phone here and see what happened. And there's another example, like gamification. It's a much simpler one, but in China, there's a payment app that is trying to encourage people to do things in an environmentally friendly way. And so every time you use this payment app to do something environmentally friendly, like buy a ticket for public transport rather than fill up your car, you get points. But the points are used to grow a tree. So you have a little tree on your phone that grows from a seedling into a tree. And once it gets to a certain size, they actually plant a tree. So it actually connects up the whole process. So it's a corporate donation scheme. The corporate is paying for all of this. The person isn't, but I think it's great. I think it's a fascinating way of actually using the things people do every day, like using their phone, to actually make a real difference.
That's so clever.
Sorry, Helen, I can't hear you.
Better? Hang on. Switch the fan off. Can you hear me?
Yeah, can do now.
I had a proposal out with a charity at the moment, actually, who've got a similar idea. So they're talking with IKEA, and basically if you buy certain furniture from IKEA, you can donate, or they buy back conservation areas. So, and it's worth like a cup of coffee. So €3, for example, piece of conservation somewhere in, I don't know, Kenya. So every person that buys this chair, for example, would have then some piece of conservation conserved. They couldn't spend it. And it's quite a complicated concept, and they're seeking funding at the moment, and I don't know how, and they're trying to gamification, make it a game. They're trying to create kind of Facebook again to make this massive. So they've got huge ideas, but it's such a complex issue that I think they're going to struggle to.
Then your sound's not coming in.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a complex issue, and I think they're going to struggle to get something if they don't kind of simplify it. But it's a similar idea to what you're saying, that you buy this piece of furniture, and with that you conserve a bit of land in Africa. But it's quite removed, and it's like what we were saying about going back to making it real. Would that it sounds nice, but it's not kind of relatable. But anyway, yeah. So I think it's great.
I had a great idea. A client suggested a great idea for a game to me, and I don't think it could ever happen, but I think it's genius. And it was a disability charity working with people with Parkinson's. And they say the thing with Parkinson's is it gets progressively worse, just like a game gets progressively harder. So the idea of the game was from the first level, you'd have very mild symptoms and you'd be trying to do everyday things. And then when you pass that, you'd be on the second level and things would get progressively harder and harder and harder. And I think it's a really interesting idea, but how you could do it in a acceptable way, I've got no idea. But it's a way of trying to just show people as well what disability is like. So what it's actually like living with disability, but in a gamified way.
That's fascinating.
Mm.
Okay, we could talk about this for a long time. We're coming up to 2 o'clock now, in the UK at least. Do people want to take a 5-minute break? We've got a break.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. We'll just take a 5-minute break so people can make a tea or coffee or whatever. And then 2:05 or so, I'll start doing leadership for consultants, if that's okay with you.
Thanks. See you soon.
Okay, see you soon. 5 minutes. Cheers.
Go.
Excellent. Welcome back, everybody. I'm going to talk about leadership for consultants, and I'm going to share my screen with you. Okay, there we are. So, the IFC is an organization that's been built up now over 20 years, and it's always really had the same aim, which is to change the world. We do this pretty much one client at a time. And it's because neither business or government will solve all the problems. But I think that fundraising, and as fundraisers, we're in a unique position to scale up civil society, to make a big difference to the organizations we work with, and for those organizations to then change the things in the world that we feel are wrong. So I think we have a unique mission, both as an organization and as individual fundraisers. And I think that's a fascinating area. So I think that we are in a key position, and I think that we bring passion and are caring and a very positive attitude to what we do. But it requires leadership to transform organizations. And that leadership is both for those organizations we work with, and it's also for us within our lives as we begin to develop our consultancies. A great many of consultancies will never go beyond being a one-person consultant. But if you really wish to grow and develop that consultancy and to be more effective, then we'll need to take on board and have people working with us, other organizations working with us, and those people will need your leadership to drive them forward. Part of the key to making that work is how we conduct our own lives, how we behave ourselves, because how we behave will be the way the people that we work with begin to behave as well. So if we say we're going to do something and we actually do it, if we promise something and then carry it out, the people we work with will tend to feel that is the thing that they should do, and they will tend to follow that process. A lot of leadership, as opposed to management, is about the way you conduct yourself and how you relate to your staff. And part of that comes back to the situation we have at the moment with leaders around the world, where authenticity has become very important. As people vote for people, they've looked at politicians, they've felt that we can't trust these people, and they've looked for people who felt authentic. And that authenticity is partly following on promises, and it is a range of things which a proper and good leader should have. Unfortunately, it has tended to be the the populists who have exhibited those tendencies, who've looked like the good leaders, and people have moved en masse towards them. Same trend happens if we do things well. How we treat others, how we cope with pressure, how we follow through on our promises. If we can do this, then we will find that as leaders, our people that we're leading will respond to it. There is a big difference between leaders and managers. And simply put, a manager is somebody who organizes the people who work with them, gives them a task, follows up on that task to make sure it's being carried out. And then when the task has been carried out, they look back and they praise the person if it's done well, or they work out how to make sure things don't go wrong in future. So it's a simple process with a manager. It's very task orientated. Whereas a leader is somebody who is setting the far goals for an organization, setting the signposts for the future, where we will be in a few months' time, where we will be in a few years' time, and they lead and bring their followers down that path. People know where they're going with a leader. So managers are task-driven, results-orientated, and they go from one task to the other. Whereas leaders are really focused further in the future. They inspire people to follow them, and they exhibit the qualities which make people want to follow them. That's not to say that they don't have tasks. That's not to say they don't have goals and don't ensure people follow those goals and do those tasks properly, but they inspire them to do it rather than frighten them into do it, or rather than pushing them to do something one step at a time. And I don't know whether you've had experience of this in your working lives in organizations, but I know that it has been the people who have come across as those who I've wanted to work with who have been the leaders. Their personal qualities have attracted me. The managers have tended to be people who have pushed me to do one thing after another, and I've always resented and pushed back against that. Maybe that's just me. So it is interesting that these two characters have both been presidents of the United States. And they both have qualities which has got them there. And it's interesting that Trump, for instance, as far as I can see, is not necessarily a good manager. He doesn't really set tasks, ensure people do them and carry them out. That part of him seems quite chaotic. But what he does do is he has a recognizable character and a way of inspiring and bringing people with him, albeit people we may not think very much of. But he says something and attempts to carry it out. He tries to keep his promises. Because he's a poor manager, he often fails to keep them. But you can see something going on there, which is very, very interesting. Obama, on the other hand, I'm a great fan of and maybe biased towards, but I really saw Obama succeeding in things like setting up Obamacare. It was exceptionally difficult with the Republicans having the power against him, but he did that through inspiring people, bringing them together, and doing the kind of leadership things and having the leadership qualities which would make that happen. So I'm very, very impressed. I think both men also have a degree of charisma. They both are instantly recognizable. You walk into a room, you see these people, and they walk in and you know exactly who they are. And you know that they're the leaders within that situation. Part of being a leader is having recognizable qualities. You don't walk into a room and go around the outside. You go straight in, you're clear, and often just the way you dress means people recognize you. If I say orange face and red tie, probably most people in the world know who I'm talking about. Obama slightly more diffuse in how he dressed and what he did. Interestingly, actually, there's a nice photograph of him and Bugs Bunny. There's the two sets of most famous ears in America. And part of him keeping his features looking like that was part of creating that impression, so he was instantly recognizable. Anyway, so visually strong, emotionally strong, and striking. That kind of charisma comes from partly being recognizable, partly resonating with people. And you'll resonate with different people. So people, very often you look and say that person's got no charisma. Another range of people would find they're actually very charismatic because they have an emotional connection with them. And we have an interesting situation in England with our new Prime Minister. So looking just academically at leadership, sometimes as I've looked online, they've said, well, the thing to do is to look for the kind of leader that you are and then to be a better kind of leader. I think that's wrong. I think you should go towards being a certain kind of leader. And it is really leadership with the characteristics on the right-hand side. I think you shouldn't discover you're an authoritarian leader and then carry out that kind of leadership. It's not what is necessarily within you, it is how you develop and grow that. The range of leaderships that are usually given are autocratic or authoritarian, paternalistic, which means you're autocratic, but you're looking after people, but you're doing it for people. People don't have equal rights as far as you're concerned. The democratic or participative way is very much to ask people what they want, how they want to go. As a leader, you can't spend your whole time doing that because you are not then leading, you're asking other people to lead. In certain circumstances, that's possibly, within certain political movements, the right way to do it. I think for us consultants, I think there is no point in talking to all our suppliers and associates and everybody and letting them to make a decision. It'll be usually us making the decision, consulting with them. So we may want to know how they feel or react to something, but it's not necessarily a democratic situation. It's a situation where you're in charge at the end of the day. And the laissez-faire way is that the leader doesn't really care. They let other people just carry on how they want to. And sometimes when you have a group of people who are highly professional, those people, you can be fairly laissez-faire with them because they work really well. They know how to do what they do, they're motivated to do it, and they know where you're going as a leader. So you don't need to be pushing them down a route in any autocratic way. It's something which they will tend to follow anyway. But the characteristics which I think you need to cultivate as a leader is to have a strong communications. And often we will find things like speaking in public are things which we shy away from because it's a difficult thing to do. I think as a consultant, we're going to go out there and be communicating with people. Speaking in public, I think, is a very strong part of that. And that sets you up to look to the public like a leader. If you feel that you're not very good at doing that, then train. There's lots and lots of different ways of training and practicing over and over again until you do become a very effective communicator and a very effective speaker. Personally, I find speaking very hard in public. I don't find it an easy thing to do, and I've had to train myself to do it and then do it over and over again. I'm still not sure I'm a great public speaker, but I get asked to speak and I do, and I'm happy with it. And I'm getting used to speaking in what I like to think is a more inspirational way and a less how you do this fundraising technique way. And that seems to get me higher scores than it ever did when I just woke up and said, this is how you do direct mail, this is how you do a capital appeal, this is how you do a legacy campaign. I now need to bring other things into that kind of speaking, and that seems to be working. Passion and commitment. This will always make a difference because it'll excite the people around you to help you. And you'll find even when there are associates of yours who have specialist skills that you bring in to help you with a client, your passion and commitment to that client and to getting the job done will inspire them to go that extra mile to help you. It's not just because they're getting paid for it, it's because what they're doing is worth doing, and what they're doing is quite exciting. And part of that they'll pick up from you. Positive attitude is always a contagious thing. Well, our new Prime Minister in England has a very positive attitude. It's about all he has got, but it's very positive. It'll be interesting to see whether that can change the situation in which he's locked into. Innovation is good. As a leader, one has to recognize that innovation is important, and it's important for us because the situation keeps changing. The situation we're in as consultants keeps changing. The external environment in which we operate keeps changing. And as Helen was talking about, the world that we're moving into, the not in the real world, but in the online world, that world is changing quite rapidly, and the methods of payment, etc., are moving quite fast. So we need to innovate, we need to understand all those changes and to bring them to our clients. And collaboration, I think, for us is very important. We need to collaborate with the various suppliers we have. Often we need to collaborate with our associates who come on board to help us, and we need to collaborate with each other. And I think actually we do that very well. I've enjoyed all the collaborations I've had with everybody within the IFC. There are only 365 chargeable days in the year for us. And in fact, there's nowhere near 365 chargeable days, as you will all know. There is so many days you have to spend getting clients on board. There's so many days the clients who don't come on board. There is so many days when you're on holiday, etc., etc. There's a very limited number of days you can charge. So either you charge a fortune per day, which is quite hard to do, or you bring in associates to help you, you bring in staff to help you perhaps, and you bring in other agencies who can do work for you. And that is really the only way of building and developing your money into a much larger concern than just you doing things on your own over a period of time. I tend to look at keeping the standing costs of the organization as low as possible. So what I'm trying to do is to not have offices we pay for, so we work from home, not have very many staff because the consultancy will go up and down slowly, and when it comes down, staff become a fixed cost, and that can rapidly drain money. And to work with a lot of partner organizations because they have specialist skills, and the people we work with, our clients, recognize those specialist skills, and they won't necessarily believe that I myself or Bill or other people have all those skills. So it helps to be able to bring in other people to help with the clients. And that is the group of people that we have to lead and to make work as a team rather than a set of separate people. So you need to inspire that team, to build the team first, then to inspire it, setting the goals for the team. And very often this is merely over a single client at a time, but you might be looking what you're going to do over the next 3 years or over the next 5 years. How will you grow and develop your own consultancy? And then get going and over communicate. Getting going I've put in there, which seems obvious, but I think it was the German philosopher Goethe said that it's the first step is important. You take the step, and then everything else begins to happen and flow from that. It's very, very easy not to take the first step, to be able to think about it and think, well, it's not ready to do this, I'm not ready to do that. Being a little bit brave, taking that little bit of risk is very important, because we're also entrepreneurs. Each individual one of us is to some extent an entrepreneur, and success depends on pushing the limits, taking a bit of risk, moving things down the line. Over communicating is something which I learned many years ago, and it seems very odd to think that that is a positive thing rather than an annoying thing. But what I've found is that very often, when I was working and had a team of people, I would send out a memo to them about something we were going to do on Friday. On Friday, half the people hadn't read the memo. And it's only by over communicating with them, sending them a memo, chatting to them when I saw them, turning it into something exciting, sending them another memo, that actually people got to do the things that I wanted them to. That over communication seemed important. And I think it probably is as well with our diverse range of people, associates, agencies, etc. It stops things from falling between the cracks. It really helps to make sure things happen when they're supposed to happen. Right, there are a certain amount of zombies around. And this is not just me selling my book. I think there are people with whom you want to work and you discover actually they're not particularly good. They're not the right people to work with you. Or you might even take on board staff or appoint an associate. And then when it comes to it, those people don't perform. And I think those people you really have to deal with. You need to face up to them and get them back on track or sack them. The problem with having people on board your team who are less than professional in what they do is something which will damage you with your clients. It'll make it far harder for you to work. And I think as that comes up, it's sometimes quite hard to take the decision with somebody who you possibly thought of as a friend or as a really useful colleague who then doesn't do the work they're supposed to do. It's quite hard psychologically to challenge them and to sort out the situation. I think part of being a leader is to step up to that situation. You get your dream team and you get your dream performance, and then you get your dream results. Lots and lots of money coming in and happy and satisfied clients who are then getting their fundraising working. I quite like that quote from Angelique. It's very important that we, I think as a consultancy, and I hope within the IFC, that we use our hearts as well as our brains, and that we care about the clients we work for, and we don't necessarily work for every client that comes to us. And I think we also need to care about the people who we work with and to help them. And just a small instance, I know when we've gone through difficult financial times, I try to pay the small traders, the individual associates who need that money before I pay the people who come from big concerns who don't need that money so much. But a lot of it is just the way in which you treat people. If you treat people properly and well, you get a response out of them. So now we have a series of problems in these days because things aren't static, because things change. I'd rather like the quote from Andy Grove, who said, "Only the paranoid survive." If you don't look at what your friends are doing, if you don't look at what other businesses are doing, if you don't watch the other consultancies in your field, those consultancies will steal a march on you because everything is constantly changing. So you really need to be looking over your shoulder and checking what other people are doing. What are their websites like? How are they communicating and marketing themselves? Who do they have on board? What new things are they introducing? And looking and being very careful to make sure that you know and understand how your competitors are operating. And as we've said before, what's happening in the technological world, how that's changing. We also have a lot of regulation coming in to fundraising. Keeping up with that is important because our clients will expect us to know what the legislation is, GDPR, etc. There's also changes in the way money is moved in society and changes in society itself. And I think this is going to affect fundraising. That a lot of fundraising money for organizations has been drawn from mass fundraising, raising a relatively small but significant amounts from a large amount of people, and that's tended to be the middle class. What has happened in England to the middle class over the past few years is they've failed to raise their incomes very much. And the fact that their professional class has changed. Their professionalism isn't respected in the same way as it used to be maybe 15, 20 years ago. They've tended now to be managed a lot closer with a lot more regulation. They've lost the pensions that they used to have. They've lost the tenure where you couldn't get rid of them out of their jobs. And there's been a whole series of changes in the UK in the situation of the middle class. They've almost dropped into being like the old professional working class used to be. And the professional working class has dropped into being a precariat with jobs that aren't very good, where they don't know from one week to the next how much money they're going to be bringing in. So I think that this is going to, and is at the moment, affecting the way in which organizations raise money. And for good or ill, it's tending to move towards the wealthy people within society. So this is really just saying that we live in challenging times, and even though we may be doing well now, we should be very careful not to be complacent, because you need to keep that state of paranoia up over the next few years and be very careful about what is happening in society and what other people are doing. So I repeat that a little bit. As a leader, we're looking to set the far-reaching goals and where we're going. And at least where we are now as an organization, I'm very pleased with how we are developing internationally and how we are beginning to pick up those international clients who want to work in several different countries. I think this is beginning to work very well for us. But of course, what we mustn't do is to abandon our own homegrown clients. They're going to be the bread and butter for the indefinite future. We may be setting the long-term agenda, but resourcing that agenda properly is very important. As individuals, resourcing it is very hard to do. I've had to borrow money to resource certain things I wanted to do within the IFC. And I think setting aside some of our profits is an important area. It tends to be when you move from having a salary and spending pretty much all your salary at the end of the month to being a consultant, you tend to spend all your profit far too early, when really we should be dropping our standard of living down a small amount and putting our money to one side so that we have it for new ideas or for marketing or for the times when things don't go well. I think saving is an important area for us. And as we advise our clients to grow their income from diverse sources, I think it's important for us to do the same thing. I know principally our income will always come from consultancy with clients, but we need to look at what we offer those clients on one hand, so maybe there's a range of services we offer, but other ways of bringing in money that we can do as consultants. I think that is going to open up as the technological changes come now. I think other things will be there for us. So we adapt to change and innovate. I personally believe in running fast and breaking things, trying to make things happen and testing things at the edges, seeing if we can't make something happen. And if it doesn't go well, that doesn't matter. I think a certain amount of failure in one's life is a good thing. I don't think that, I think if you never fail, that's because you're not pushing the boundaries, not trying new things. And I think trying new things and pushing the boundaries is important. I think there's a difference between the way Steve Jobs did things and the way that Microsoft operates. So Microsoft really was the running fast in breaking things. Steve Jobs didn't do anything until he got it perfect. And that worked very well for him. So maybe that'll work for you as well. But I like to run fast. Okay, well, think we need to look, I'm slipping a little bit away from leadership here into just a reminders about things that is far easier to get an old client back again and to get new work from an old client than it is to get a new client. Just one of these universal rules. It's very easy to forget about old clients when you've done the work for them and not keep them in the picture. Old clients are a little bit like donors to an organization. They're people who one should keep in touch with, should keep on board with, and they will come back again and again. Writing out a 3-year strategy, I think it's important to get the strategy in writing. And I certainly did this year after year for quite a long time, updating the strategy. And then I would set out within that a key part of it. So I'd say over the next 3 years, we'll invest in overseas directors. Another 3 years, we might invest in marketing, getting the SEO right. Another 3 years, we might invest in something new. So there is a sort of a key thing that I'm aiming at within a period of that strategy. And I think investing in yourself is very important. So you go on courses, you go to meetings, you do the social networking. Putting money and time and effort into yourself is something which is well worth doing. It's perhaps an English thing. We tend not to invest in ourselves. We tend to feel that that is wasting money, or it's too lavish in some way, or it is not a thing to be particularly proud of. But I think it's an important professional characteristic. And lastly, follow the money. Where are your largest sources of money? What kind of clients do they come from? What are the key areas to go for, and who are these people? It may be the largest charities in the country that you're in. It probably isn't. It's probably a setback from that. It is not the smallest charities in your country. Very often when we start, what we want to do is help small charities, and we have the confidence to do that because we know exactly what they should be doing, but that may not be where the money is. The money for us may well be in middle ranking charities, and that is really the ones that we should be working with and going for. Hi, Sarah.
Hello. Hi, John. And hello, everyone else.
Okay. Love your finance and IT. Finance and IT are not for everyone, and sometimes consultants will come into consultancy and won't have a strong understanding of finance or IT, but you really do have to get to grips with it, particularly invoicing people, chasing them for their money, making sure they actually flipping well pay you at the end of the day. And IT is just crucially important now. It's the way we communicate. It saves us a fortune. And if you haven't got a key idea for how you use IT and the various areas that Helen talked about earlier, then your clients are not going to have a lot of respect for you. So develop your goals and timetable. If you don't have really goals for your consultancy, write them down. Writing them down means they tend to happen. And think about a timetable, schedule those goals. Look for what kind of support you need to achieve them. And then as time goes by, check to make sure you're going down the right line. You may have problems, you may have zombies on board, you may have difficult times with your finances, but as a leader, you actually have to stop and deal with these things and not accept that they're going to hold you up. How do you get around them? Sometimes you get around them by seeking advice from people. Who can help you? Who can be a mentor perhaps for you for a while? Who can help you with specific problems? It's well worth putting the effort into clearing out those obstacles and making sure you do reach your goals, because that's very satisfying. And that satisfaction means you go on to do larger goals, better work, etc. So, as I said before, get going, over-communicate. And as Barack Obama has said, after this long process, a brighter day will come. So, questions? Questions, comments, thoughts are welcome. I'm going to unshare my screen now, if I can find the right button to do that. It's unshared itself.
I've done it.
Thank you, Bill.
Oh, hi, Sarah.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can hear you. Thank you for joining us. How hot is it where you are?
Very, very, very warm. I had to pop out in the car and it said 37, which is phenomenal.
Wow.
Hmm.
It may go to 39 somewhere in the UK. Today is supposed to be the hottest day since records began.
Is that, gosh, my word. Yes, it's sort of holiday-like in some ways.
Yes. Okay, I tended to, in going through that, maybe to be more of a manager than a leader. But I hope it was, in some ways, useful.
Very useful, very interesting. And I do like the puzzle when you say invest and plan 3 years, because sometimes I realize that we say all of those things to our clients and we don't do it for ourselves, or at least
yes.
we don't do the four goals, and we don't reach the goals and we just one of them or whatever. But we have to think about our company. So in terms of time management, I am struggling to organize my week in doing that, let's say, to save a part of the week, concentrating on that, on planning for IFC Italy, on planning for my, planning or studying or updating. And it is very difficult, but I think that we have to have it clear that a company grows if you work on it, and so we have to do it. We have to.
Yeah, you have to have that intention to grow a company. It's very easy to work one client at a time.
We rush. We look after clients. We rush, a lot.
Yeah.
We have to stop a little and think about our company. That's true.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks.
Okay. Good. Any other comments?
I thought it was interesting you talking about running fast and breaking things and taking it on, because I know that there's difference between you and me is I'm far more risk averse. But I think there's a balance there somewhere that we probably hopefully managed to strike between us of doing things just because and taking it.
I think it's a very good combination.
Yeah, and also when it comes to paying for anything.
Yes. You certainly have your finger on the finances there, Helen, which is great. I would spend everything. It would just go.
It's job of the finance person to say, no, we haven't got any money, don't spend anything.
Yes, thank you. Okay, that's good. Now, I don't know if we want another quick break. I've got one scheduled in between each meeting. I'm still halfway through my cup of tea, so I'm fine. Would you like a quick break, or do you want to go on to Sarah Gray's presentation?
Maybe just 5 minutes.
Okay, 5 minutes.
Okay, I'll pause the recording.
Great. Yes, please. Welcome back, everybody.
What an interesting topic.
Thank you, Francesca.
Yeah.
Okay, it's over to Sarah to talk about insights into major donor fundraising.
Great.
Over to you, Sarah. Take it away.
Thank you, John. So I'm looking down the side of my screen, and I'll just say hello to everyone because I don't know everyone. So hello, Jim, and then I think there's Francesca, and I don't think Helen's there. But for those who don't know me, I'm Sarah Gray, and I am UK Senior Consultant at IFC. I have found, probably over the last 3 years, much of my work has taken me into the major donor area. So I had a big client 3 years ago, one of the museums, and helped them complete a capital appeal. And that took me into the major donor arena. And my current client, my current large client, again, I'm doing a lot of work on major donors. So I have developed a slight fascination with philanthropists and the sort of trends amongst the super rich, largely in the UK, but to some extent globally. And I am sort of developing this knowledge in my head that is going to basically form the basis of this presentation. So that was my sort of first, just to sort of get us all warmed up. So I look at things like, I don't know, I mean, probably those who are not UK based. So this I always read cover to cover, which is the Sunday Times Rich List. And then I also look at, I use, there is a $1 million donation report, which is sponsored by Coots, and that's been done every year, and I use that for my information. The Charity Foundation.
Sadly, they're not going to do that anymore.
I know, it was their last one, I know.
Sorry, go.
That's right, but you're right, it has finished. I'm sure someone else should probably take over the sponsorship, but anyway. There is also a giving report done by the Charities Aid Foundation that is an annual thing I use. These are all at the end of my presentation. And then it's called Wealth X Billionaire Census, and that's done annually, and the stuff I've got is from 2018. And then I just came across a report from an organisation called Beacon Collaborative, and I've used that for some of the, sort of as I go further into it, some of the trends. So I think the first few slides are a little bit of sort of background on who these people are, and what we're talking about. So, this largely taken, this is the richest people in the world. So this, I think there's a combination of sources for this, but I think this is quite interesting. So very much US based still. I think as you come on to the next one, this is interesting. So this is now looking at billionaires. Gosh, what a thought. Billionaires by country. And I think this is interesting because were one to look at the WealthX information, perhaps in the year 2000, to me, the biggest trend, and I did, Jim, listen to your presentation earlier today, but one of the biggest trends is the sort of emerging forces in regions where there is a changing political and economic backdrop. So, you can see certainly China and India, they are second and fourth here amongst the, it's ranked by value of fortunes, I think. But that certainly is a trend you know, when I look back at the billionaire census, that has significantly changed. I also, when I was thinking about this, I think this is also quite interesting because it's logged and mapped by country. Obviously, every billionaire is born somewhere. You know, they all have a home. But I don't think if you ask many of these people on this list, you know, they are very much acting as global forces in many cases. And I think perhaps as we think about it, that's one of the things that our governments have been certainly slow at catching up on. These people, you know, Sir James Dyson, as an example, he's moved his business to Singapore. The gentleman who was at the top of the rich list last year, Sir Jim Ratcliffe, he has moved his personal wealth, I believe, to Monaco. So, you know, I think their attitudes are different, and perhaps our governments, with time or perhaps with a bit of speed, will catch up to this, and they won't have quite so much to give philanthropically, because perhaps our taxation system, our cross-border taxation system, will work in a way that should reflect the way that they operate. But we will see. So just looking at Britain, which is really where my knowledge is. So I've just pulled out a few facts and figures about sort of British wealth, basically. You know, I think the third bullet point is quite interesting. 68%. Sorry, billionaires account for 68% of the wealth of the 1,000 richest people. I mean, that's quite amazing, really. And the changing trends. So again, when I was sort of looking at the background, those involved in technology, it's quite interesting. That seems to be a sort of increasing area of A, wealth, and B, to a certain extent, to a certain correlation, a greater degree of philanthropy. So there's a couple of people I thought were quite interesting. There's a guy called Dan Middleton, who he was in the list of young rich people, and he hasn't had a holiday for 6 years. But what he does is he uploads a video each day of him. I presume he's playing Minecraft. I can't think what else it could be, of him playing a video game. And he records himself either playing the game or narrating the action behind it or describing a new capability of the game. And his wealth currently stands at 25 million. So I just think, you know, it's quite interesting, the changing times. There's another man who, what was it called? It's called, his name is, he's a Russian, he's Andrei Andreev, and he operates the world's most popular dating app. So he has, which I think is just a different world from, again, the rich list probably 15 years ago. So he has 490 million registered users across 190 countries, and his fortune is recorded as 1.5 billion. So, you know, the changing world of sort of philanthropy and philanthropists is, particularly over the last 5 years, is quite interesting because, you know, many of the people I work with sort of assume that it's very much the landed gentry. You know, that's what they, you know, several of my trustees particularly will be familiar with, but actually that's not particularly where the wealth is coming from. So I just pulled up a couple of, I've softened current government inertia. It did say before, John, zombie government, but I softened it. So I've sort of looked at what might affect the super rich and therefore the knock-on effect with their philanthropic giving. So, you know, everyone I'm sure is aware that Brexit is a big issue for Britain, or non-Brexit. I think for us as fundraisers, where that leaves us, we don't know what the impact will be of, assuming we do leave the European Union. if EU funding is removed, how will that funding be replaced within the charitable sector? There may be possible changes in policies and laws, climate change, human rights, employment rights. How will that affect us as fundraisers, and how will we need to respond to that? And that is, although it doesn't immediately affect us, that does give, if one is planning a capital appeal, that sort of context gives a sort of certain degree, a degree of uncertainty. I also think it's quite interesting, this sort of issue of family trusts and this move to take sort of family trusts away and take them offshore. And then sort of coming on to the comment I made before about the landed gentry. So, if you look at the spectrum of people and where sort of philanthropists are sitting, many of them are more entrepreneurial in nature. And again, if you look at the sort of particularly UK rich list 10 years ago and the UK rich list now, it's a very, very, very different picture. And therefore, as fundraisers, the way we should be responding to that is quite different. The way these people operate, their thinking, their motivations is very different. Just sort of anecdotally, and as I sort of put up the next slide, I was privileged enough, probably 2 months ago, I went to the Institute of Fundraising's Major Donor Conference, and I interviewed at the conference a UK philanthropist. And I found he was very interesting because some of my thinking in this presentation is around what he said to me. So I suppose the two things I took away from him was he had made his money by lighting what I'd call sort of lighting the blue touch paper for young entrepreneurs, finding budding entrepreneurs, investing in them, and basically making his money from their businesses thriving. And actually what he was then doing in his philanthropic giving, he was doing exactly the same. So he was seeking out sort of smaller charities which had great propensity to grow and develop, but that needed seed funding to get going. So his attitude in his business life was very similar to his attitude in his philanthropic life. So that was my first observation I took from him. And then the other one, which I think I'd perhaps come on to talk about a little bit later, is he was taking his family with him, and that was very interesting. So it was, there was a number of schools that he had invested in or funded, I can't remember in which part of the world, but it was done as a sort of family venture. And that was his motivation. So, I think he was more, I suppose it was more simplistic than I might have imagined. There was no detailed analysis. He was very much listening to the voices of those who were benefiting from what he was doing. So that he was very interesting, and that actually, it was a very interesting encounter, both before interviewing him and then sort of actually during the interview. So then this next slide here that I've got up, so moving on to look at charitable gifts. So I always think it's very interesting. I think this must be from the Coates $1 Million Report. Higher education sort of comes up again and again and again. And actually looking at this, I think probably a third of these are what they are. So we've got University of Cambridge, Harvard Medical School, and Imperial College London. So again, higher education is, well, it's a key area for philanthropic giving. And then I love the one at the top. I just think, I don't know a lot about it. I did once hear a presentation about this, but I think it's quite amazing the amount of money that has been put into this incredibly obscure place, which I believe is near Durham, and has totally transformed. Firstly, I think the initial investment was for a castle, but now it's the entire, I think Auckland is a place. It's everything linked to the castle and the community. And this one gentleman, Jonathan Ruffer, who has contributed the most enormous amount of his personal wealth, which is interesting. And just the level of these donations, I always think as fundraisers aiming high, and I like looking at this because it makes one realise that there is always possibility. One of these people is on my target list at the moment, and I just think it's possible. It's certainly possible. So just looking at some of the trends in UK philanthropy, one of the ones that, again, I think as fundraisers, I'm not going to go through each one individually, but I think as fundraisers, that it's really important that we help change is point number 3. That is horrendous and quite frightening. So of those people who have wealth greater than 10 million, only 10% are giving anything to charity. Now, obviously, I have to be dependent on the source of that information, but that, although that's of concern as fundraisers, that means there's great potential for us from this sort of major donor market. Quite how we harness that 90% of people, which would need a great deal of thought, but that is 16,000 people who fall into the category of sort of being not quite super rich, but are potential major donors, who either we're not doing our jobs properly or they're just not interested. But I think perhaps there is work to be done on that tier of major donor, not just the super rich. And I'm making a mental note to myself as I say that, to find those people who sort of fall outside the well-known names, which is who we all look for, to find that sort of tier, those 16,000 people who are perhaps not as well known, but have great philanthropic capabilities. These are my thoughts based on sort of some of my reading of these reports and my current knowledge. So I'm sure people know the Giving Pledge. I think that has made point number 1 quite interesting. So for those who don't know the Giving Pledge, it's basically where the world's wealthiest people formally commit and pledge to giving the majority of their wealth back to the not-for-profit sector. And it's quite a simple mechanism. They just record their name and their pledge, but it is global, which is good. I believe there are, at the moment, 204 pledges. I mean, obviously there could be a lot more, but there are 204 across 23 countries. And I think to a certain extent, visibility is a good thing, because the more visible they are, the more transparent they need to be in what they're doing with their wealth. So I think as a fundraiser, I welcome and like visibility, and with that, transparency on what they fund, what their rationale is for funding it, how they want to be acknowledged, etc. I never fully understand those who want to remain anonymous. But anyway, so yeah, visibility is interesting and has certainly increased over the last 10 years. So the second point, I have touched on this, the importance of family in philanthropic decision making. For sure, that is whether it's a growing trend, a more visible trend perhaps. Many philanthropists are establishing family foundations. I sort of read a really interesting fact recently that philanthropy is described as the leading passion or hobby for many billionaires, and that for 5% of billionaires, it's described as a primary industry, which is quite interesting. And I suppose I would imagine quite naturally, once they have established their fortunes, many make a full-time transition into the world of philanthropy, and leaving their personal legacy and the legacy of their family becomes almost a full-time job, which I think is quite interesting, sort of understanding that importance of leaving the personal legacy and of their involvement with their family. I came across that. I did some work at the National Army Museum, and one of our major donors was he was a sort of old school, very much landed gentry, and he wanted to give, but he wanted to give with his sons being on the journey with him. So, I think we perhaps asked him to either be at the opening ceremony, etc. But it was very important that his sons were part of that. Quite an interesting, perhaps not new, but just always worth looking more broadly than just the sort of target major donor. Okay, so I heard this at a conference recently, actually. This question on impact, and it's perhaps something we can discuss later. So yes, we're all, it's sort of, as fundraisers, I was going to use the word rammed down our throats about measuring impact, but I think it is. But I wonder whether, to a certain extent, it's come full circle. And some of that was born of the interview that I did with the UK philanthropist who, yes, reporting on sort of impact and having spot-on statistics is really, really important. But actually, listening to the voices of those who are benefiting can sometimes carry more weight. I just did something very simple earlier today, actually. I wrote just an application for something, and right at the last minute, I actually thought, what, I'm going to put a case study in, because I can tell them till the cows come home that this percentage increase, this X, Y, Z, but what is motivating me to do it is this was quite a severely disabled young man. It's this man, this young person. That's my motivation for doing it. So I'm going to share it. So, he's obviously, we were allowed to include his photograph. So, we put in a photograph, or I put in a photograph of him, told his story, and I think that probably adds more weight than all those facts and figures that I've given in that application. So I wouldn't overlook that. I think, again, question, has it come full circle? And then my other thought on trends, I don't know whether it's a trend, social investment. I think it's a really, really interesting area, one that I personally would like to know more about. Big Society Capital is a really interesting site for understanding and accessing social investment opportunities. I did come across something quite interesting, actually. There was a quote perhaps on that site that said, it really is nothing new that in the mid-1800s, a philanthropist had given £3,000 actually, and he'd given it to purchase land on the Fulham Road in order to buy, given it as a loan, that's the point, he'd given it as a loan to purchase land on the Fulham Road in order to build the Royal Marsden Hospital. So although it's not new, I think it's a very interesting area, and one that we shouldn't overlook. I've got another lovely statistic here, which is 3,000 organisations in the UK alone are benefiting, and that there is £1.5 billion worth of investment, which I had got no idea about. That's much more significant. And again, note to myself, I think it's an area that as fundraisers, we need to understand and know more about and have in our armoury when we are helping advise people on their funding sources. I think that's quite important. Right. Okay, so I'm nearly at the end. This is my penultimate slide. So I read an article in the FT, and I realise I'm being recorded, so I should keep this factual. Linking to it was discussing the Sacklers, and most of their wealth has, as we probably are all aware, has come from an organisation called Purdue, which I think comes from Purdue Pharma, which is a pharmaceutical company involved in the manufacture of opioids. And basically, the article was suggesting that they may be using philanthropy to burnish their reputation, which I thought was quite interesting. That then led me on to almost the obvious statement, which again, this article was built around the premise that maybe philanthropy is just simply another way to exercise power. So I'm not going to comment much more on that, but I think that's quite an interesting thought. The next one, I think it's supply-led, which troubles me because it's not demand-driven. I'm not sure there's any way we can change that, but I really wish we could. I think on occasion it becomes demand-driven, but given the nature of the relationship, I think by supply-led, it means it's sort of led by the sort of wealth sources. But again, that is food for thought. How could this ever be changed? I'm laughing, John, because you finished with a photograph of Barack Obama and an uplifting quote. I've got one of Winston Churchill, an uplifting quote. In this world is the fundraiser king. I sort of having prepared this presentation, which I did at length and did quite a lot of reading for it, it made me realise our power as fundraisers. And although I have got one further slide, my main point is it's so complex. It is changing so fast. The philanthropic world, the changing pattern of the super rich, the sort of dynamics of the global economy. I think as fundraisers, we have we're critical to linking all of this together. And if we do our jobs properly, there is immense opportunity for us to make significant change across sort of all fields by understanding the motivations of the rich, by harnessing those 16,000 people who have wealth above 10 million who aren't giving, by broadening the scope of the sort of top major donors in the UK, by understanding that major donors operate on a global scale, not just entrenched in the way that we categorise them. So, I think understanding that, playing to the time that we are given within our jobs to piece all that together is really, really important. And a great opportunity, and I find that quite motivating. So I've put this up. I don't know whether people agree with this, but I love this. And this is but the last slide is my sources, but this is my final slide because it made me feel good. That, I mean, whether we agree with the fact that it was all given for a building, that happened very quickly. It was wonderful, that sort of galvanising of basically the world's major donors, corporate donors, etc., to solve what was a significant crisis. I just thought I would leave that as my final slightly uplifting slide. And then right at the end, just in case people are interested, those were my sources. So we've got a record. So that is me finished. I am very happy to answer questions or to discuss some of my thoughts around the trends amongst the super rich. Over to you, John.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I thought that was really interesting, and it's made me stop and think quite a lot as you went along there. Okay, comments, questions, thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. A comment really about, you mentioned impact there, and is it changing? Are we moving away from a world where it's all about what your outcomes are and being able to prove you can do it? Because I think you're right. I think it is, but I think it's going to be a long time before most people catch up with it. I think it's interesting that it might be that the individual philanthropists are moving away from that, whereas the foundations and grant funders and institutions are very much focused on that still. But I think even there, they're going to be moving away from it because it's such a limited way of measuring things. I mean, we've worked for a number of organisations where one of them we worked for was trying to combat extremist violence in villages in some of the most deprived parts of the world and prevent people from signing up with terrorist organisations. Now, how do you prove the impact of somebody not becoming a suicide bomber? You can't do that. Mm. And so I think those models of impact are kind of broken in the modern world. And so we need a new way of doing it, a new way of showing it. And I'm not quite sure what it's going to be yet. But I think the anecdotal and those case studies you mentioned are really important. I don't think they're enough on their own, but we can't get away from how important they are.
Yeah. I think one of the fascinating things is how diverse the billionaires are and the multimillionaires in their giving, because I think you've spotted some trends that are really useful, but in a way that highlights the fact that they give in for different reasons in different ways. So there'll be a whole range of them who give because they can see real impact and want to make that impact happen. There'll be another range of them who give perhaps more emotionally, where they feel an affinity with the cause and want to make something happen and trust the institutions who are carrying it out. Mm. And then there'll be those who make a sort of family decision at the end of every year, getting their family around the table and chatting to them. And there'll be those who give because somebody's approached them personally. Mm. And if you ask them why they didn't give, they'll say, well, nobody asked me before. It's a difficult situation for us fundraisers to operate in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There was a philanthropist I was talking to a while ago, and I was giving a presentation at the Institute of Fundraising conference last year. And he was saying that what he looks for, it's not so much the impact, but it's how professionally run the organization is. You know, that's what he wants to see. He wants to see this is an organization that knows what it's doing, that can manage his money effectively and will report back to him on what it's doing. Whether or not they can prove X, Y, Z is less bothered about than actually he trusts the organization. I think that is something a lot of charities need to learn. Particularly the smaller ones who want to grow into and to accept those big donations. They need to learn to become more professional.
It's probably very important in cross-border fundraising as well, that if you're trying to raise money in another country, you've got to try twice as hard to prove that you can actually carry out the work and that you have the right leadership, etc. Mm-hmm.
I'd like to share my views on this.
Please, Jim.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Jim. Yes.
Okay, a couple of good points that we saw in your presentation, and I think it's really true. We talked about I mean, when I look at it from the Indian perspective, I see the North-South divide to start with. So we do have our donors in the West giving money to countries like India and Southeast Asia, and yes, absolutely what you said head on was that a lot of philanthropy is decided by the donors itself. So that's one aspect that we're looking at. The second aspect that you mentioned is what I call process-driven and outcome-driven. And it is true that today, when we look at India, especially when I look at the last 3 years of the corporate environment, developing resources for for giving out to charities, it's a lot of money going out there. But of course, as I mentioned in my video, is that 60 to 70% of them have already started their own foundations. But there's one thing that I realized is that with the corporates, they aren't really philanthropic driven. They are more into, they're more into quick turnarounds. Mm-hmm. so they can have low investments and high returns. So basically, from a corporate perspective, they're looking at putting the least amount of money and getting the best return on it from a business perspective. So if I invest in 1,000 people, I want to show an outcome for building up my brand, for building up my company's image, which is exactly what the Indian corporate is looking at. Very few corporates in India are really looking at it from a philanthropic position. So, for example, I could say the Azim Premji Trust or the Tata Trust or the Hinduja Trust are names that you can talk about who are seriously interested in philanthropy, but a lot of them are not, and it's kind of a superstitious kind of an attitude that you see around happening. I think one of the major challenges really is how do you move out? How do you find funding in the Indian context? Especially when I talk to my prospective clients, I know the challenges exist with the corporate world. We are talking about, I'm sorry, I don't know how to convert this, probably about 200,000, 200 million pounds or something like that is the Indian corporate reserve that's going out. But then let's assume that in the last year, we know that 70 to 80% of it was already used up for elections. The money was reused to make a huge statue, to put it into X, Y, and Z. So we know the money is not going into the environment. So of course, many people still come to me and say, well, the easiest resource is international fundraising. And there is a challenge because international fundraising also has a huge competition today. And people are saying, like I was recently talking to one of the donors and said, well, we are more interested in an outcome-based program where we can, have concrete results. And we're not looking at, feeding the poor. We're not looking at things which are long-drawn, process-driven, which can take 20 years to have an impact. So yes, from a consultant point of view, sometimes we have to advise our clients to rechange their strategy when it comes to fundraising. Because many clients are looking at a process-driven activity, which could last a couple of years or maybe even 20 years. Yeah.
So I absolutely agree and understand what you're saying. When I think I always categorize my fundraising into trusts and foundations, corporates, and major donors, although I recognise there is immense overlap, and where I draw a Venn diagram, there would be big areas of overlap across all three. You're absolutely right, and I would say I have a very similar experience in the UK with the corporate sector, whereby they are looking for a sort of quick hit. They want immediate returns. Their motivation for giving is very, very different from the group within the Venn diagram that I focus my presentation on, which is the sort of super rich and major donors. Yes, they will have a corporate vehicle as well, but just within that sort of area that I concentrated on, they're perhaps different from the corporates which you have just mentioned, and their motivations are very different. I absolutely agree, and I've had that experience. So the way one then responds to them would be quite different.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sarah. Could I just ask about family trusts? Could you maybe just say a little bit about what they are, in case anybody doesn't know? I think there's something which we're beginning to uncover gradually as fundraisers, and I don't have a clear idea in my own mind how we influence family trusts, other than by meeting people who are part of them, almost by accident, maybe as part of our networking. Is there any routes opening up to influencing family trusts?
That's interesting. So thinking from personal experience, e.g. at the moment, my sort of main client at the moment, and how I'm doing that, I am doing it in, well, I'm going to use the word textbook way because it's the way to do it. So once I've done it, it is another way, which is literally working with the trustee body
right.
to make contacts,
Yeah.
either with the family trust administrator or using the trustee body to get to them directly. In terms of that's sort of how we're approaching them, but that assumes one has the knowledge base already. In terms of understanding the family trust market, I still use my traditional research sources because they are there, they can be found.
Okay.
So I use the traditional routes to find them.
And so there are family trusts and then there are family offices, which is something different, which is much more the office that looks after a billionaire's money and investments, but can also influence their philanthropy.
You're absolutely right. One of the trustees in the organisation I'm working with is a gentleman who his job was to run family offices.
Right.
Which is quite interesting.
Yeah.
What I have never done, but could do, or one could think about, is how does one identify those guardians of the family offices? Because the family trust, as you say, is one more traditional route that we understand and we know how to approach. But family offices and they're often sort of very experienced people who are running the family offices. Identifying them would be very interesting. Whether you do it backwards, you find, the sort of wealthy families and reverse into who is managing their family offices.
So maybe this is one you can write the textbook on in time.
Maybe that's the way, because having given this presentation, I'm very troubled by those 16,000 people who have wealth above, or it's slightly more than 16,000 if my maths is right, 16,200 people who have wealth above 10 million, but who are not really engaging in our world.
Yeah, disgraceful.
So perhaps, maybe that is a way of, but maybe it exists, maybe there is a record of family offices. But I think that's a definite opportunity for us fundraisers.
Just going back to that research you mentioned on the people over 10 million giving, I went to a presentation from the Beacon Collaborative, who you mentioned before.
Okay.
Do you know the median gift for all people in this country who are worth above £10 million in a year? The median gift, so if you add them all together and divide by the number of people, you get £240. Isn't that appalling? Absolutely appalling.
Yeah.
Absolutely appalling.
The scope of the challenge, but also the scope of the opportunity out there, I think.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. We've gone past 3:30, so I wonder, Brian, sorry, if you wouldn't like to do Lawrence's presentation.
Absolutely.
That would be excellent.
Jump right into it here. Okay.
Sorry, can I just, I'm going to leave the meeting, if that's all right. So thank you very much. Nice to meet everybody.
Nice to meet you, Sarah.
Thanks, very Sarah. Thanks a lot for your presentation.
Bye, Sarah.
It's brilliant.
Bye. Cheerio. Cheers.
Bye.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen here. Can you guys all see me?
Yeah.
Okay, terrific. So,
Bill, you might need to leave. Completely leave. Oh,
sorry about that. Let me just minimize this. Okay. So what we're talking about is, and I mentioned it briefly earlier, I want to talk about our marketing and sales program, how we've really bolstered this program and integrated marketing and sales. So what I'm going to do is really talk through the specifics of our program and hope that there are certain insights inside of what we're doing that you can all take away from. This document that we're looking at here is really a summary of how the program functions as a whole. And what I'm going to do is walk us through this document and talk about how we're actually implementing the steps that you're seeing here. That first line is really what's at the heart of this integrated process. Marketing and sales are linked so that we're only responding to nonprofits who want what we're offering. I think a lot of times we spend too much of our time trying to market to nonprofits that either aren't interested or don't have the capacity for outsourced services. And that's a problem that we've run into and have been really active in trying to solve. And we've had a lot of success with so far. So to start with, I'm going to talk about this first box here, which we see as surfacing leads. I think that this part of the process tends to be, it gets lost in too much theoretical thinking when we think about who are our prospective clients. Getting a hard number on what our market actually looks like, the prospective clients, the NGOs that can afford our services and require outsourced services, getting that hard number is very important in really crystallizing who we're looking for and who's looking for us. Now, what I mean by that is that there's a subset of NGOs that are large enough to afford our services, but they're small enough to require outsourced capacity. Depending on how you tailor your services, this might vary for you. But for us, we're seeing really a market of NGOs that have an annual budget between $3 million and $125 million. Now, when I'm looking at that market, and when we first looked at this, this was somewhat surprising to us, we found that about 55,000 NGOs in the US meet that criteria. This is actually, I think, a really important insight to our industry, because right now in the US we have about 1.7 or 1.8 million registered NGOs, which means the vast majority of our prospective clients are in the minority. There are not a lot of clients, as far as the percentage of our market, that can afford our services. It's an important insight so we know where we're spending our time. So what we've been doing is building this list out of prospective clients and marketing specifically to that list. By segmenting the prospective clients that we're marketing to, we know that the people that are responding to us have the capacity to afford our services. And using that annual budget criteria has really given us a better response rate and a better turnover rate as far as the number of people that we're prospecting versus the number of converted clients we have. In our marketing program, we're emailing this list that we have now about once a week. Generally, we're not selling inside of this email. We find that selling inside of the email, when we try and pitch services inside of the email, we don't generally get that many responses. And for us, we would rather build a relationship through that email and spread more knowledge about our thought leadership and about the breadth and depth of our knowledge in fundraising to really present who we are as a firm rather than make a sale inside of an email. Because realistically, we're not finding clients through email. We're not selling clients through email, where they're getting to know us through email and then we're building a relationship from there. So we've really focused our email marketing on the thought leadership, on spreading our blog, on really letting our readers understand our industry better and understand the strategy that goes into our thinking more thoroughly. Another way that we've been integrating marketing and sales is by including a portal response on our website, so that when NGOs are visiting our website, they're essentially segmenting themselves for us. Now, what I mean by that, I'm going to redirect from this document over to our actual portal. And I'm sure you've all seen portals like this before. Sometimes accounting firms will have them. You might see, request a quote portals on other websites. And what they do is, once an NGO shows up on this site and they populate this information, they're essentially segmenting themselves for us. And it allows us to gain essential information about prospective clients, and also quickly group and categorize the clients that we're looking at and gear our solicitation strategies to different segments. So for instance, what you'll see here is our clients, or prospective clients rather, can check all of these boxes for requested services. Depending on what boxes they check, we can tailor the communications to that specific category. So for a client looking for prospect research services, I can automate emails to go to those prospective clients and further develop the relationship with them without having to use my personal capacity. And this is where we've really found that automation and segmentation becomes very important as you're marketing to a larger group of people. If you don't have some forms of segmentation and automation integrated into your marketing process, you're going to end up using a lot of your capacity in prospective clients that won't actually convert, that aren't actually ready for outsourced services or don't have the capacity for outsourced services. And those automated responses, you can get pretty creative with them, and you can put a nice personal touch on them. One place in particular that I want to point to on this page, as far as what really tells me the most about a prospective client, and it's a question that I use in phone conversations when clients call us. It's a question that I use in email when clients email us about for services, is this question right here. What is your budget for the proposed fundraising work? When a client has an answer to this question, it really, to me, signifies that thought has gone into engaging in this process. And when a client has a plan, that's a much better signifier that they're ready to convert and ready to engage in outsourced services. So this is a question that I go to very often, and it quickly segments clients for me as far as who can afford our services or who is allotted parts of their budget for our services and who is not. Now, that is really how our marketing program is funneling the kind of prospective clients to our sales program that are going to convert. So what I'm going to talk about now is the sales program and how we're treating these prospective clients after we've qualified them. One of the things that we found is very helpful, if you look at our private client group research, as fundraisers, we have really some of the most advanced prospect research tools at our fingertips. Using these tools for prospecting clients, we found is very helpful as well. Relationship mapping in particular has allowed us to find clients that haven't necessarily approached us yet, but that we would like to have a dialogue with, to open a dialogue with, and finding what our point of entry is with those prospective clients. So relationship mapping is one of our prospect research tools that we've heavily integrated into our sales program. And I would recommend thinking about the prospect research tools that you have at your disposal and thinking about how they can be integrated, because these aren't just tools for prospecting donors. They're, at the surface, very powerful data tools and data mining tools that we can use to learn more about the target market we're looking at and about prospective clients that we're interested in. Now, one of the, if not the most successful part of our sales program are the seminars that after we've prospected significant leads, we invite prospective clients to a by invitation only seminar. These are exclusive seminars, and generally will take about 4 organizations to come to this seminar. I'm going to talk a little bit about the strategy that we use inside of these seminars because we found them to be highly effective. For one, we typically like to get two members of an organization to attend the seminar, either executive staff or board members, because generally that just increases engagement and it puts more decision-making power for the organization at the seminar itself. Now, at these seminars, prior to the seminar, right, we will ask all of our participants to submit 3 questions or relevant dilemmas that they're currently facing in their fundraising program. What this does is it really turns this from the kind of seminar where participants are being talked at to a very conversational environment. It really opens people up more. And you also learn a lot about people and organizations by the kinds of dilemmas and questions that they put forward. It also, another effect of having questions submitted when you're running these kinds of seminars is the conversation becomes a lot more. So we're not just talking to prospective clients about theoretical concepts and about, abstract strategies. We're talking about real world problems, and we're giving them practical solutions. So that adds a lot of substance to the kinds of conversations that we have at these seminars. People tend to take away something very specific when you're addressing the real world problems that they're having. Ultimately, the thing that makes this the most successful is that you are giving an insight to the kind of strategy you would bring to an organization. When a prospective client sits in front of you and says, this is the problem that I have, and then you can say, well, this is how our firm deals with this kind of problem. And these are the recommendations we make for dealing with that problem. The client is right away getting a taste of what an engagement with your services are like. That tends to be the thing that really allows for these relationships to build more depth when we're trying to contract with a new client. And then finally, we have one-on-one appointments. These are for leads that have been heavily qualified. We know that they meet the annual budget criteria. They've gone through a vetting process from me, and then they'll get passed over for closing of the deal through our sales program, which is set up by Lawrence. This system makes sure that when a lead is put into Lawrence's purview, that they are ready to close or close to it. It saves a lot of time, and it allows me to focus on automating processes, segmenting clients, prospective clients, and funneling leads in a way that is cost-effective and time-effective. So this is kind of an overview of how we've been integrating marketing and sales. It starts with automation and segmentation, and it really ends with deep relationships and conversations and face-to-face interactions. And how we allot our time in this process becomes very important, especially as we're working with lists of 15,000 or 20,000 or 30,000 NGOs. So I would like to leave some time here for questions. That's kind of an overview of how I'm doing things, and I hope that it was helpful for you all.
Thank you very much. That was really, really helpful, Brian. Thanks a lot. And you're dealing with quite a large number in that 20 or 30K organizations.
Correct, yeah.
My question was a little bit about the weekly emails. That seems a large number, and maybe the situation is different in the UK. I wondered what sort of dropout rate you had from that, of people who put you into junk mail or do something else with you that is rather non-responsive.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, as we're building our email list, we'll do an import of new prospective clients into our email list. And whenever we do that import, that's when we're going to get the most people who unsubscribe at the next email. But really what that's doing for us is curating our list, right? So, we're putting all these people in, and then once they've unsubscribed, we know the people who have stayed on are interested in the content we're providing. I think it's important to reiterate that this is really just content. It's not really sales-oriented content. It's more, this is fundraising strategy that we think you're going to find helpful. So we're not pitching people on a weekly basis. No. And our open rate right now it'll usually hover between about 13 to as high as 22%. So those are the open rates that we'll get. And it really fluctuates based on, I'll tell you the type of content that does best is current events content. Whenever you're reporting on a piece of news, whenever you're talking about the latest in data that's been released, that kind of content does very well, tends to get high open rates. So yeah, philanthropic news is always good to share.
How do you keep on top of the content? Because, you know, we're all busy. Do you have like a team that helps with the content writing, or is somebody allocated to it? How does that work?
Well, I mean, primarily, and this is, I mean, that's definitely requires capacity. Luckily, Lawrence has a never-ending stream of content. I don't know how somehow he does. We feature guest bloggers. This week we featured a guest blogger. I always, recommend forming those relationships with other blogs and bloggers who enjoy reading that provide insight to you, and asking if you could share that content on your own site. Consistency is important. So, if you've decided that right now you have the capacity to do it every 2 weeks, then just keep it on that regular pace. It helps with your, not only your branding, but it helps with your readers knowing when to expect you. And yeah, I mean, guest bloggers really are, if you don't have the capacity, they really are a great resource, and it's a great way to build relationships with other people too. So that would be my recommendation. But for us, it's Lawrence. I don't, like I said, I don't know how he keeps content coming, and so that's generally where he's the most common person that we have featured at the blog.
Excellent.
I'm interested that you ask so upfront about the budget that people have got available, because it's always a question I ask whenever anyone comes and looking for something. And my usual reply is either, oh, we haven't really thought of that, which, as you absolutely say, demonstrates that they really haven't thought the whole process through at all, or else it's a variation on we're not telling you.
Right.
And I wondered whether you get that a lot as well, and how you deal with that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's really, I would say, possibly the majority of NGOs that reach out will come back with that response. Either we haven't thought about it, or we don't want to tell you now, we don't want to talk about it. We're still in the exploratory phase. And that's fine. That's an understandable response. The way that I deal with it is, well, one, we'll let that conversation progress naturally as it goes to the end of the conversation. But as far as how much of my capacity am I willing to invest in an NGO that either doesn't have a budget or can't disclose to me, it's not going to be much more after that. You know what I mean? I'm going to send the follow-up email and give them an idea of what our services cost. I like to send them a range and let them know that this is generally what our services cost, but they are highly nuanced, that we, offer a lot of kind of unique tailoring of services depending on what a client needs. So we do have a range in price. But from there, it's really, by second or third conversation, we need to have definite answers on what the budget for the proposed work is. Otherwise, we can't commit too much more of our time, because that's where we start sinking time in, and then the client's just ultimately not going to be ready to commit at the end of the day. So that's how I will generally handle it. Does that answer the question?
It does, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that's helpful. I mean, it sounds to me like your approach is a little bit different than ours, and I'm wondering whether we need to change ours a bit, which is about, you're very upfront with clients about how much you're going to cost. We often try and don't talk about that until they see what they're going to get for it, and then they see that this is how much work they're going to get. Well, that's worth that figure. But you seem to be more upfront about, look, if you're going to engage with us, this is what you're going to have to pay.
Right. Well, also, I mean, I think part of this is we've really worked on, what you call your elevator pitch. Yeah. What are the things that clients are looking for, and what do you provide, and how can you tell it to them in 30 seconds? And, when it comes to the services we're offering, really where we want to focus is, clients know about grant firms and they know about grant services. What are the two things that make unique, and how do I get that across as quick as possible? So we want to focus on those unique aspects of our firm, and we want to make sure they know it before we give them the price. That's definitely important. So, you know, in that organic conversation, before we talk about price, we say, well, you know, these are some of the things that we do that you're not going to find elsewhere. And generally, this is what our services cost.
Okay.
Do you think there's a cultural aspect, you know, between, say, the UK and USA in approaching, talking about money?
Yeah, I mean, that's, you know, it's interesting because we do have our international presence too, and I would say probably about 95% of the international NGOs that I've talked to, they wouldn't disclose the information about their budget for the proposed work. And so, you know, part of it is cultural. I think part of it is that as nonprofit consultants, we are engaged in an industry where we're always trying to help, and we might not always as vividly view the process of engaging prospective clients as a sales process. So I think that realization, you know, helped us define our process a little bit more, but I do also respect that there is a cultural element to this. We try and be sensitive to that, and tailor the conversation based on that. Try and make it a little bit less jarring for some. Now, also, we're based in New York, so, you know, there is even a kind of cultural difference in certain regions of the U.S. as far as how some NGOs will receive that question and how others will. In New York, we tend to have very forthright conversations with NGOs, but, you know, in certain other places in the country, it might take a little bit more delicacy, a little bit more light touch. But this is all where, you know, the actual integration of the marketing and sales program helps us. Because if I've gotten back a response from an NGO that is not going to disclose that information, I can keep that NGO kind of in the cultivation process, the process of working on that relationship in a very streamlined way, in a really, you know, emailing, you know, every once in a while, keeping the relationship going. I might, if I see progress being in the conversation, schedule a follow-up call. But ultimately, I'm handling that. And then once I feel like we've gotten to a place where this can actually convert to a sale, then it's moving over to our sales program. That delineation is really what's saving us a lot of time, and what's reserving our capacity, of Lawrence's capacity specifically, to be able to focus on clients that are ready for an engagement.
Okay.
I think that's absolutely fascinating, Brian. I'm sure that after this meeting, we're going to be sitting down and discussing that and looking at your presentation again. I think that's amazing. Very, very useful. Thank you for sharing.
Absolutely. If you have any questions afterwards, you know, do you have my email? Feel free to reach out. We're always happy to talk about it.
Great. Okay, any last things before I ask Bill to do a short wrap-up talk? No? Okay, Bill, do you want to take it away?
Okay, well, I've not got a lot to say apart from thank you everyone for coming along, and I hope it has been valuable. This is the first time we've tried this. Hopefully it won't be the last, but we would really appreciate feedback on what works, what doesn't, how we could improve it, how often we should do this. I mean, we've got our monthly meetings. Our thought was we could do something a little bit longer like this, maybe a couple of times a year, but we're very open to ideas about that sort of thing. Another thought is, does this replace the need to meet face-to-face? I think it is really, really good to be able to get together and do that face-to-face, but as we grow around the world, it's becoming increasingly difficult. For those of us in Europe, it's not too difficult. We can still do that, and I think we probably still should. But it's ways that we can work together and stay connected to each other as the IFC family grows around the world. So I'm really grateful, John, for having organised this and for coming up with the concept. The IFC Horizons site will grow as we put these videos onto it and any others that come along. And yeah, please do let us know what you thought and what we could do differently or better.
Thank you, Bill. Excellent summing up there. And thank everybody for taking part in it and for giving up so much of your time today. That was really good. Thank you very much to the speakers, and thank you very much to those who have sent in videos already. Francesca and Jim, that's great. We're steadily putting them up. And that's it for this IFC Horizons. Thank you.
Okay. Nice to see everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.